a little bit about myself. Up until this April, I lived in the beautiful Okanagan. The Okanagan region, as you may know, is a tourist attraction. It's known for its wineries, its orchards, its beautiful mountain scenery, its winter adventures. Those stories that are often woven together when we think about the Okanagan, there are other stories that go untold, that are hidden. These are stories of the thousands of migrant agricultural workers that enter the Okanagan region for many times, on average, 7 years, but for many, decades. These individuals have stories like those of, I'll be using pseudonyms, but those like Carlos, who after a 12-hour day of work, has been asking his boss for months when he might have improved living accommodations because he's sleeping on the floor. Or the story of Juan, who, after speaking up about unsafe working conditions, hasn't been asked back to the place where he has worked and the main source of livelihood for his family. These are photos here that have been collected, taken by volunteers and with the permission of workers. So a little bit about some of the programs that these migrant agricultural workers enter. We have roughly, the numbers are increasing every year, and the numbers of workers coming under temporary, what people may not know is that the number of individuals entering Canada for employment are higher under a temporary status rather than a permanent status. I believe as of 2018, we had roughly 70,000 workers coming under temporary migrant agricultural programs. And in the Okanagan region, we see about anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 workers. So these individuals come from Mexico, or the majority in the Okanagan region anyway, come from Mexico, Jamaica, and other Caribbean regions. They pay income tax, they pay into Canadian pension plans, they pay into employment insurance. But the majority of these individuals will never be able to get back this investment. In fact, the majority of them will not have access to the basic public services that, through their work and their labor over decades, they've contributed towards. I had the opportunity to start connecting with some of these individuals about 5 years ago in the Okanagan when I was doing a very different research project. But through this experience, I was able to talk to many individuals, and I realized how underserved and really, to a large extent, invisible they were within the communities. And it got me thinking, as somebody who had done research looking at the impact of Canadian industry abroad in the global south, I was now in the position here in the global north where I was again seeing the impact of Canadian industry on the bodies of people from the global south, brown and black bodies from the global south, who were again being exploited, didn't have access to the same employment standards, were facing unfair labor and health and safety risks, and were expected to absorb that as a condition of keeping their employment. So I had the opportunity to work not just as a researcher, but also to join forces with a volunteer organization, RAMA. RAMA is an organization made up completely of volunteers that does a lot of community-based work. And the basic assumptions of a lot of the work that RAMA does is that, or a lot of what's guiding the work that RAMA does, is that the more isolated workers are, the less connected they are to the community, the less of an opportunity they'll have to be able to access their rights, access the services and protections that they're entitled to. So sometimes some of the actions that a group like RAMA might take might not seem explicitly political. It might be a barbecue or a community event where, maybe an event like this where busloads of migrant agricultural workers are able to join the conversation. There would need to be more translation, but you can understand that the fact that we don't see migrant agricultural workers in these regions, even though we have thousands of workers here in southwestern Ontario, for example, speaks to the fact that even though these individuals are everywhere and they have produced so much of the foods that are on our table, we don't see them. And for that reason, there's a need for groups like Rama to help bridge that connection to individuals and help to, with that start, be able to help workers get access to these services and protections that they're entitled to. So through the work we did with Rama, I was always wearing my two hats, as was mentioned before. I was wearing my researcher hat and my activist hat. And something that became very clear very quickly was that as well-meaning and as great as the work that Rama was doing, we were a handful of individuals, volunteers, with other full-time work. And there were the needs of 4,000 to 6,000 migrant agricultural workers in the region, and those numbers are growing. So, and the reality is we couldn't reach the majority of these workers, and even when we could reach them, the continuity of care or provision of services couldn't be offered. So one thing that my colleague and I, who was also is also a part of Rama, did is we wanted to talk to service providers who, in theory, we would hope that there was an interest in providing support. And the reality is, with the majority of service providers in the region were not providing care or support to migrant agricultural workers. And when they were providing care, say for example, as a clinician, they were doing so in a way that wasn't safe. That would, for example, facilitate medical repatriation or cause workers to, lose their job or something like that. So, from a place of optimism, we reached out to a few organizations and we had honest conversations with them. And these conversations were fruitful because they allowed us to develop a model of support and to secure funding for a model of support that could reach out better to migrant agricultural workers. And so far, this model of support consists of a legal advocate and an outreach worker. And we have, just strapped enough money together for about 2 years of services, as well as an evaluation component. And the idea behind this model is not only we'll be able to reach out to workers because as researchers and as activists, we know what the issues and challenges are. We know the various reasons are that workers don't even access certain services, and also when they access services, why they're not appropriate. So we know where an outreach worker can help. And we also know the challenges that workers face in the reasons that they don't access legal protections. So on paper, there's so many things that migrant agricultural workers are entitled to, right? They're entitled to workplace compensation. They're entitled to health and safety standards at work. But there are reasons that these individuals don't come forward. And it's because our systems are set up, as my colleague was mentioning before, they're individual, right? And the onus is on the individual to come forward and make a complaint. So imagine a migrant agricultural worker who's being bullied or sexually harassed or is asked to work or isn't given proper equipment when working with pesticides. This individual is expected to, first of all, learn a new language, in many cases, learn a new political system, call a office number that likely is automated between the hours of 9 to 5. So you get the picture, right? So the reality is that all these laws that exist on paper can't happen unless we provide a bridge. And that's what our legal advocate is intended to be. So, I think that there are so many things that I could talk to about the challenges that migrant agricultural workers face. And I wish I could tell you that the support model alone is a solution. But the reality is that the support model is just chipping away at the highest tip of the iceberg. And when we reflect on why there are so many of these challenges in terms of workers accessing services, in terms of workers even knowing what their rights are or feeling entitled to access those rights. The reality is that we've created a system where we don't even have to think about where our food comes from, where we wouldn't even know how to locate some of these individuals who make up a huge part of our workforce. And we don't even have to welcome them into our homes because if they get sick or once December 15th hits, for most of them under their program, they're sent home. Just one more anecdote here. To give you a sense of how much access is an issue for workers, we've had women under the program who have actually preferred to have medication mailed to them to have a medical abortion rather than to go to a hospital, because a hospital would mean that they would risk their employer finding out about their pregnancy in a hospital setting. And from experience, they haven't been able to trust clinicians to maintain that privacy. So, I situated myself today in the Okanagan because that's the area that I'm coming from. But as I mentioned, this is a challenge that we're facing throughout Canada. And I would like for all of us to reflect on kind of a bigger question, when we think about how work is organized for migrant agricultural workers, and how not just how work is organized for migrant agricultural workers, but also who we write in and who we write out of our stories. Whether the story be about who's part of our nation, or the story be about who's a valuable contributor to our economy, or maybe even bigger, who's worthy of our protection, who's worthy of our respect. So taking in mind all of these questions, I'd ask you all to go to migrantrights.ca and take the pledge to unite against racism, and to start asking these big questions. This organization is an organization focused on helping us lobby differently and think differently about how we organize ourselves politically. We know that racism isn't just a challenge that's facing migrant agricultural workers, and it's not just perhaps something you may hear down the street. It's something that's affecting how we organize our lives and what kinds of opportunities are available for some and not for others. And it's also a tactic that's being used right now to divide us. So I invite you to really, instead of letting racism divide us, to take the pledge to unite against racism and for us to work together. Thank you.